Recording Academy, Compression Fundamentals.
All right, everyone, now it's time to talk about compression. Now this one can take quite a long time to start to hear the effects of compression, but I do want to show you a few things in this to get you started off on the right track. Compression is basically an effect that is trying to control the dynamic range of whatever instrument or whatever track we might be using it on. So one of the most dynamic things that you're going to find are the drums. The drums can be certainly pretty quiet at certain points and then thrashing loud at other points. But we're going to go through just like we did in the EQ video. I'll start with the lead vocal and kind of build our way from there. Certain tracks won't use compression that much at all. Again, it's going to come down to your personal preferences, but I'm going to go to the lead vocal. I'm going to open up my mix tab. And again, we're using the stock plugins built with PreSonus Studio One, so you have access to these as well. Open up the PreSonus tab and go to compressor. So again, compression is all about the dynamic range and how much dynamic range do you want to limit. If you're doing something that's more folk music based or orchestral, the more natural sounding you want your music to be, the less compression you probably need to use. Now, I'm going to lean on the side of using a little bit more compression than I'm comfortable with because I want us to sound very much modern. More modern music tends to be overly compressed. And again, it's all up to your personal preferences. This is a subjective matter. So feel free to use presets if you'd like. So here is the compressor. Starting off early, you can click the preset button. Just click this folder here. You go down to vocals. It's got different presets set up here. We can go to male vocal 1. Give it a try. Whenever you're using presets, just be careful about the threshold knob. So the threshold is at what point do you want the compressor to start smacking down on your tracks. If my singer is singing pretty quiet and then all of a sudden they start screaming loud, at what point do you want it to start slapping down the volume? If your compressor is set to a high ratio, it will start to limit, it will basically act like a brick wall to where that vocal can never go louder than a certain point. And you might be asking yourself, why not just set everything to a limiter? Why bother with any sort of ratio? Well, when you are compressing information, there's this distortion effect. So compression definitely has a sound. You need to think of it almost like a distortion pedal. The more effect you're using of the compression, the more distorted your vocal is going to sound, and you'll hear that in just a minute. So on this male vocal preset with Studio One, they default to a 7:1 ratio. This is quite high. This is like a really high ratio for compression. It's got a knee of 10 decibels. Basically, this is some wiggle room for it to be able to act. It's got an attack of 0.5 milliseconds and a release of 50. It's set to adaptive, so it's going to change as you're going. But this readout on the screen, I think this would be very helpful for you to see what the compressor is actually doing. So we're going to take the threshold knob and we're going to gradually turn it down. And as I turn down the threshold, you should notice that there's more distortion. You're hearing more of the effect of compression. I'm going to solo the lead vocal. I'm going to switch this gain knob to auto, so that way that as I'm turning down the threshold and you're hearing more compression, you're also going to hear that effect of compression even more egregiously. So let's start with the high threshold. Let's bring it to 0. I'm going to bring it down. On the right side here where it says reduction, you're going to see a yellow bar, and that yellow bar is telling us how much compression we're actually getting. Ideally, your compressor is probably working between 3 to 6 decibels of compression, but I'm going to turn it down so that we're hearing more and more compression. You'll hear the effect of it. So here we go.
Light up by the moonlight, we watched the stars come out, and when we were half asleep, we heard an awful sound. A big ugly beast came tumbling as we all ran through the woods.
So right there, it sounds like it's going through some sort of rat pedal, basically a distortion pedal on your guitar. It gets pretty gnarly. I'm going to bring this threshold knob up to where we're getting, like I said, about 3 to 6 decibels of compression at the loudest portions.
And I wouldn't change one thing about that night, even if I could. Where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know where I come from. Where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water...
Okay, so now we've got the compressor set. This is a pretty good setting. You feel free to copy it if you'd like. I've got a 3.3 to 1 ratio. 2 to 1 ratio, 3 to 1 ratio is going to be much more subtle than what they had earlier, which was a 7 to 1 ratio. The knee is about 10. The threshold is at -18, which makes sense because most of my stuff was gain stage to about -18. I pretty much always want to see the compressor doing something. If it's not doing anything, then I might just be whispering into the microphone. The attack, I've moved it up, so we have a little bit of a slower attack. The attack time on the compressor is how soon do you want the compressor to start smacking down the audio. Obviously, a faster attack means that it's going to quickly slap into effect. If you have a slower attack, it's going to allow that information to be loud, and then it's going to bring it down to where it needs to be. So if you have a fast attack, it'll basically have more control. If you have a slower attack, you're going to have less control over whatever object you are compressing. The release time is how soon does that audio return to its natural state. Usually it's going to be around 100 milliseconds. I don't find myself going anywhere other than that. And then the gain, like I said, I've got it set to auto. I just trust the algorithm, so it's going to keep it where it's supposed to be. So let's listen to the vocal. We're going to do a before and after. Here's a before.
The ugly beast came tumbling as we all ran through the woods, and I wouldn't change one thing about that night, even if I could. Where I come from.
Here is the after. Here's with the compressor.
Thing about that night, even if I could. Where I come from. Where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch.
Now you can notice it's bringing up a lot of the sounds of spittle is what I would call it. Like my mouth clearing spit, all the breathing in between, all that stuff is being brought up in volume because we are compressing. So you need to keep an eye out for that stuff. If you want to use a gate plugin, you can also put a gate on your vocal track so that you don't hear so much breathing. The effects of compression will obviously tend to flatten out your frequencies. So some of those higher frequencies that you wanted to tame earlier, now they're being brought up in volume. You might need to use a little bit more corrective EQ if you choose. Now let's listen to this in context of the rest of the mix. I'm gonna unsolo the vocal so we can hear it with the rest of the music, and here it is with the compressor. So this is compression on.
Even if I could, where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. Where I come from.
Now you can layer more layers of compression if you'd like. So if I want to add another compressor, I can get even more dynamic range sucked out of this vocal. I'm gonna set this one to a 3.3 to 1 ratio. I'm gonna go with a lower knee. I want this thing to jump in right away. And the release time, let's go again with something around 100 milliseconds. Let's set an auto gain. Let's see if we can get about 3 more decibels of compression out of this vocal.
Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. Where I come from. Where I come from. That's where I come from.
Yeah, these sections are much quieter sections of the lead vocal, like on the outro. If I bypass both of these compressors, let's take a listen to how much it just sits back in the mix, but I turn on the compressor, it seems to have a fighting chance against the music. Here it is before.
Where I come from, where I come from, that's where I come from.
Here is after compression.
Where I come from, where I come from, that's where I come from.
All right, now we need to do the same thing with the rest of the instruments. As we start to remove dynamic range, you'll start to hear everything kind of level out. You're hearing more of the details in the mix. You may need to go back and do some EQ decisions there, but let's go to the overheads channel because I'm very curious about with the drums. I'll keep the kick drum as part of the mix, but I want to hear these drums in context, and we're going to put a little bit of compression. This drum sound a whole lot more exciting, kind of explain the process of what I was thinking. I've got this turned down the threshold to -33. I want to have more compression on my drums than I would the vocal. I've got a 4.3 to 1 ratio. I've got a knee of 6. Probably turn that down even more. Let's go to about 3. It's basically how much of a gradual amount of compression are you going to be hearing with your music. The attack time I've got set to 27.9 milliseconds. This is because with drums, I want to have that initial transient. I want to have that attack of the stick. I want it to be able to come through first and then compress the back half of the transients. So I'm going to go with a slower attack on drums. And then the release time, I've got 120 milliseconds. So it's going to be clamping on to more of the drums for a longer period of time. The makeup gain, I'm not using auto. I find that the audio is turning it up a little bit too much for my liking. So I've got it about 8 decibels. The mix knob is at 100%. Let's take a listen to before and after. Here's before. You can hear a lot more of the room sound coming through in the overhead. Like I said before, whenever you add a compressor, a lot of those nuances are going to start coming out and you're starting noticing things that may need to be corrected later. Just like we mentioned with the vocal, compression is certainly fun on the drums. I like the sound with the kick drum as well. May need to go and change that stuff later, but let's address some of the percussion. So I'm going to go to the percussion bus. Again, these are the claps and the shaker. I'm going to add a compressor. I'll just go through and find a preset here. We can go to drums. Let's see, we're gonna go with percussion. They've already got a preset for that. It's like they've got a release time of 50.5 milliseconds on the attack, threshold, and then 2:1 ratio. Let's take a listen how this is doing on chorus 2. That should do pretty well. Let's listen to it in context of the rest of the song. So we have drums, percussion, and vocals being compressed.
Where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she, where I come from.
Very good. All right, bass guitar. This one's a fun one. So I didn't use any pedals or compression on the way in, but the bass guitar, you definitely want to have some sort of compression. We can go in and load a preset as well and go to guitar. Let's go to bass. How about just bass guitar? This should be pretty basic, if you will. 9.9 ratio, that's pretty high. I don't know if I want to have it that high. Let's go with a 5:1 ratio. Got a takt time of 117 milliseconds. Again, it's letting a lot of those transients, the plucking sound of the bass, we want to make sure that the attack comes through. This got a 339 millisecond release set to adaptive. Let's load in this threshold, make sure it's appropriate. That's pretty appropriate. We got the threshold at -24. I'm adjusting the threshold so that I can see that we have at least 3 decibels of gain reduction. And then on the louder portions of the songs, we're getting probably -6. -3 to -6 decibels of gain reduction is something that you can definitely hear if you're used to listening to compression. But for the average listener out there, they probably won't even notice the effect whatsoever. Makeup gain is at 5 decibels. You'll find me using the presets a lot. It just takes a lot of the thinking process out of it, especially getting started out. Make use of presets, but then always adjust those to fit your specific needs because the presets may not be set up how you want it to be. I wanted to go with a 5:1 ratio instead of 9:1. 9:1 ratio is almost limiting. I don't feel like I need to limit the bass guitar just yet. So here's the bass guitar before. Here's after. Pretty good as well. We'll go to the keys bus, load up a compressor. If I can put these on the bus, I'd be happy with that. I don't need to go and add them onto every individual element. This mix will be pretty straightforward. Here's the keys. I kind of adjust this one manually as we're going. Okay, let's listen to that in context of the rest of the mix. So on the keys, this is the piano and the synthesizer. I've got it to -35 threshold. Ratio is 2:1. Knee is at 7.3. Attack time is 18.5. Release is 70 milliseconds. Makeup gain about 2 decibels or so. Let's listen to all of this in context of the rest of the mix.
Where I come from, where I come from, where I come from. Just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she, where I come from.
All right, here's the acoustic guitar. We'll load up a preset as well. We'll go to acoustic. Let's go to acoustic guitar 1. 6.3:1. Knee is about 15, attack time of 1, release time of 110. Let's take a listen to this in solo. All right, I like the sound of that a lot, and I definitely wanted to hear that it has some compression happening on that finger picking, and then also with the strumming. We don't hear as much egregious distortion. If we had not clipped gained the original, like, louder acoustic guitar section going into the chorus, if we had not clip gained that down, you would hear a lot more distorted acoustic guitar going into the finger picking style, but I like that sound a lot. Electric guitars, I don't know if I'm going to compress these a whole lot. Electric guitars tend to be compressed as it is. Let me just take a listen to the guitarist bus soloed on the chorus section. Take a listen to this. Sounds okay to me. Now let's listen to overall. We've got the music bus, the vocals bus, and the mix bus. There's a few things we can do with compression and EQ, and we'll get to those in just a minute. But let's take a listen from verse 2, see if we need to go through and adjust our static mix even more now that we've got compression added.
Out by the moonlight, we watched the stars come out, and when we were half asleep, we heard an awful sound. A big ugly beast came tumbling as we all ran through the woods, and I wouldn't change one thing about that night, even if I could. Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. Where I come from. Where I come from. That's where I come from.
Nice. We'll take a look at the compressor on the overhead channel.
Where I come.
I think I need to hear more of the snare drum coming out. So I'm messing with the mix knob on the drums compressor, the overhead compressor. The mix knob is basically letting me blend in the dry signal with the compressed signal. So the compressed signal is set to about 78%. So we're hearing about a quarter of what you're hearing is the dry drums coming out. I really want to hear more of the snare drum. So I'm going to add an EQ. I'm not sure yet. It's probably going to go after the compressor, but let's take a listen to chorus 2, and I'm gonna try and isolate the fundamental from the snare drum. I think the cymbals are plenty loud. They could probably be turned down a little bit, but I'm trying to bring out more of the snare drum in that mix.
when it hits her eyes, and she good. Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right, and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes, and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. Where I come from. Where I come from.
Okay, nice. So the decisions I made on the drums bus, somebody working through it just there. We've got the compressor set up how I like it. The EQ, I've decided to use a dynamic EQ to boost the low end of the snare drum. We didn't have a close mic on the snare drum. Well, again, we're using that SM81 up about 3 feet above the snare drum. I need to bring out as much low end on the snare drum as I can, but I didn't want to bring up the low end over like everything. So I switched it to dynamic mode. I've got a range set to a positive 10 decibels. So anytime that certain frequency is getting information at that threshold, I'm going to boost it 10 decibels louder. And you can see that kind of fluctuating as the song goes. So when I'm hitting the cymbals or I'm hitting the kick drum in the cymbals, you don't see this big spike at that frequency, but it's only when I'm hitting the snare drum. There's a few spots where the snare drum is not consistently producing that low end hit. This could be something that could go in with snare samples. We can go in and snare sample replace if we need to. Some of the other decisions, I decided to boost the high end. So this is an interesting technique where on the high frequency shelf, I'm boosting it 5.9 decibels. So we're making it brighter, but then we're also compressing what we are making brighter. So the overall takeaway is that the high end gets a little bit brighter, but it also gets controlled. We're controlling the dynamics. So it is actually cutting 10 decibels while also boosting 5.9, if that makes sense. So that was just a change made on the EQ. Last thing I'll say about compression and EQ is that at this point, we could also be using compression on our music bus, our vocals bus, and our mix bus in general. So if I add on the mix bus, if I add an insert, I want to add a compressor, I can make this an overall blanket compression. So we're adding compression to the vocals and the instruments all together. This is like a master compressor. But in this situation, I want it to be super subtle. You don't want to do a heavy amount of compression on the mix bus. Let's just play around with it on this chorus 2. We'll get maybe a decibel, 2 decibels of compression. This will help kind of tighten all those things together. Here we go.
Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right, and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes, and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right, and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes, and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road in the backwoods.
Okay, so on our mix bus, we have a subtle amount of compression, about minus 16 dB, 2.4 to 1 ratio, a 6 dB knee, 15 milliseconds on the attack, 79 milliseconds on the release. We've got roughly about 3 decibels of compression. You can see when that snare drum is hitting, it's taming it a little bit more, trying to keep everything within a certain dynamic range. Then the EQ, we need to be extra subtle with this. So everything is in about 3 decibels, 2 to 3 decibels increments, just adding a little bit of punch in the low end. The high end's getting a little bit of boost as well, so make things a little bit brighter. It's pretty common hyping techniques. When you're hyping your mix, you're turning up a little bit of the lows, turning up a little bit of the highs, cutting a little bit of mid-range. It's usually a good sound for some sort of modern mix, okay? So we've done so much already to the sound. But now's the fun part where we start to get creative with the mixing. So we're adding elements that aren't naturally coming from the recording. We're going to be looking at reverb and delay specifically, and other effects as well. So with that being said, once you've moved on from this, make sure you download the session files. You can be listening to this one as it is with the EQ and compression, and then look forward for the next lesson as we're adding some more creative elements. And I'll see you over there. Now, there are many other videos here on my channel other than the Recording Academy, but make sure you check the playlist for Recording Academy for more lessons as they're being uploaded. YouTube is recommending this video just over my shoulder, so give that one a watch, and I'll see you at the next video.